ball to the other players, but he usually made the basket, so he had a good reason not to give the ball away.
Faceva bene non passarla.
In 1991, Joe Bryant retired from basketball and brought his family home to Philadelphia. That November, while scanning the sports section, Kobe was surprised to see Magic missing from the Laker lineup.
The next morning, my mother comes in and tells me he's HIV positive. I was like, dang. What does that mean? You know, can he play? Is he gonna be all right? And so she had to explain everything to me. And that broke my heart.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers.
Magic's retirement spelled the end for Lakers Showtime. It would be 9 years before a kid from Italy would help bring it back. In 1991, Joe Bryant brought his family back from Italy to live in Philadelphia, where he'd once played with the Sixers. His son Kobe had spent the last 7 years of his life as an outsider in a foreign land. Now he found himself a stranger in his hometown.
Most of the time I didn't understand what people were talking about because they used to speak slang all the time. Like we'd go home and I say, what does it mean when somebody says, yo, why you sweating me? What the hell is he talking about? What does he mean by that?
But when it came to Kobe's basketball talent, nothing was lost in the translation.
Basketball is universal. No matter what you spoke, if you can go out there and play, it just didn't matter. You know what I mean? You was going to fit in no matter what.
There was a big buzz in the town about a 13-year-old who was playing at our middle school. And after 5 minutes, I turned to my assistant coaches and said, this kid's a pro.
Philadelphia is a big basketball city. There were a bunch of guys my age who already had an established reputation of being the top players. So I had to come in and prove myself to them.
Given Kobe's game, he had no trouble proving himself. But making friends was another story.
He was popular from afar and likable, but he's very guarded. He's very careful with who he lets in.
He played ball. The ball was his best friend. Weekend nights when he was younger, he didn't go to parties or hang out. He played ball.
He'd be like a senior in high school playing in a middle school. Nobody could touch him. Nobody could stop him.
In the fall of
Italian uniform, stuff with Le Coq Sportif on his shirt and whatnot. And it was awkward, but as soon as he stepped on the court, you knew what he was all about.
One thing that made it almost easy to coach Kobe, and I think maybe instantaneously gain the respect of his teammates, was his work ethic.
He would practice more than anybody else that I ever saw at high school. I come into the facility early in the morning, 5:45 or so, and I'd hear the thumping of the basketball. I went upstairs, and there was Kobe doing drills.
I would stay late after practice, and I would work on a particular aspect of my game. Then we go out into the game, I would see it paying off. And that was the most important thing to me. Because you can spend hours working in the game, but if you don't have the confidence and those skills to execute them during the game, then they mean nothing.
Lower Merion High's basketball team had been nothing to shout about for half a century. But now, with the new kid from Italy, the team started to draw.
It started off, we were playing in front of maybe 100 people, our parents, maybe a few of our friends and this and that. And as he got older and as we got better, the crowd started to fill up.
We went from having 200 or 300 people at a boys basketball game to having 1,500, and it became fever pitch.
We won 20 games when he was a sophomore. You would look at Kobe as an opposing coach when he was in 10th grade and say, oh my God, I've got to deal with this for 2 more years.
In Kobe's junior year, Lower Merion went to the state tournament but lost in the second round. The loss left Kobe devastated, but determined.
One thing I'll never forget Kobe saying was, I'm not allowing this to happen again.
So it's almost comical to hear him say this. And we were kind of just like, Kobe, relax, it's not your fault, all that. But he took it personally and said that he'd win the title the next year.
The next year, Kobe kept his promise. Lower Merion went all the way, winning the Pennsylvania State Championship for the first time in 53 years. Kobe was named All-American High School Player of the Year. That spring, Kobe, by now a celebrity himself, escorted the pop singer Brandy to his high school prom.
Well, you know, I just bumped into her. I didn't have a date for the prom. So I just asked her to go.
One of Kobe's classmates was the daughter of John Lucas, then coach of the Philadelphia 76ers. Lucas had seen Kobe play and invited him to work out with the Sixers during the offseason.
The big buzz at the time was that he was just ripping up Jerry Stackhouse in one-on-one. Possibly at that time was the first seed that was planted that maybe college was not going to be a part of his future.
I like LaSalle, North Carolina, Duke, Michigan. Those are my top schools right now. I am considered in the NBA.
Kobe was heavily recruited by all the top basketball schools, but his goal and lifelong dream was to play in the NBA, and he wanted it now.
I have decided to skip college and take my talent to the NBA.
We're flabbergasted with his decision. How can he say he's going to do this? He came across looking a bit arrogant. He came across looking naive.
You're my idol. Remember me when you're in the NBA.
But Kobe had his own agenda.
He was getting smeared all over this town, and so was Joe.
News, and I just remember thinking, what's with those goofy glasses on his head? Who does this guy think he is? It was pretty wacky to think that here's some kid you went to high school with who's going to the pros.
It was all over the place. It was in the newspapers, it was on radio talk shows. Should he do this? Should he do that? Education first, sports this. He's not ready. Parents are messing up. They didn't raise him right. It's crazy things, silly things.
Only a few players had made the leap successfully from high school to the NBA, and they were big men. Kobe was 6'5", small by NBA standards. Laker general manager Jerry West had heard about the brash kid from Philadelphia and wanted to see for himself. He invited Kobe to work out with the Lakers a few weeks before the draft.
We put him against Michael Cooper, who was one of the really great defensive players we had in the NBA. We played him against Larry Drew, and it was a joke to watch him march over these people. And the kid was 17 years old at that point in time.
He told me, he said this was the greatest workout that he'd ever seen in his history of working out players before the NBA draft, and that Kobe had the chance to be one of the greatest players to ever play the game.
I thought it was an absolute easy decision to try to do anything we could to get him.
The Charlotte Hornets select Kobe Bryant from Lower Merion High School.
The Charlotte Hornets picked Kobe in the first round, 13th overall. Jerry West then astonished many observers by offering his starting center, Vlade Divac, in trade.
There were some upset people when we made that trade. They might deny that, but there were some upset people because we traded a starting center for him and a very good player in Vlade Divac. But I've always felt that the things that set teams apart is risk-taking.
Trading Vlade seemed a lot less risky only days later when the Lakers signed free agent Shaquille O'Neal to replace him. The dynamic duo was in place. In the summer of 1996, Kobe, along with parents Joe and Pam, moved to LA to begin living out his dream.
Kobe was playing in Los Angeles Laker uniform, and it was just amazing that 10 years ago when this kid was 8 or 9 years old, that now he's playing in the NBA against me, and I played against his dad.
The fans were anxious to see him play, and Kobe lost no time in showing the fans he could play. In the rookie All-Star game, he led all scoring with 31 points. Then he ran away with the slam dunk contest. But despite these heroics, Laker coach Del Harris wanted to break Kobe in slowly.
He viewed me as being a young kid, which I was. and he wanted the other players to respect me. He wanted me to work for my opportunity. And I worked so hard, and I was already working harder than everybody else, but he felt like he had to be 10 times harder on me than he was on Eddie Jones or Nick Van Exel or whatever, and that wasn't fair.
When you draft a high school kid, everyone wants him to play, but we had a very good team then. We had a particularly deep backcourt. There just wasn't a lot of minutes for Kobe to play. I thought Dell did a nice job with him, but Dell was in an awkward position because people wanted him to play.
Bryant, face 17-foot jumper, a nice shot. That was some work by Kobe.
Kobe had spent the better part of his life as an outsider, first as an American in Italy, then as an Italian in an American city. Now his age set him apart from his teammates.
When Kobe came in, he was 17 years old.